We are, I think, the beacon, us in Saskatchewan, the beacons of small government, the beacons of entrepreneurialism, the beacons of low taxes, the beacons of responsible resource development. All of those things are not within the value set of the NDP. And I think that they'll double down on it to create an environment where, they keep voting them in and they keep them in power. And I also think that there's an innate, if I would describe this, there's an innate, I don't know if it's hate or distaste within the NDP for what everything Alberta represents. All those values that I talked about, I feel like they don't stand up for that. And I think they stand up for a core voter base and a voter base that they feel like they could sway towards them, predominantly typically in the urban areas.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News with another AlbertaDecides.com update. I am once again joined by my man, Tariq Elnaga. We looked at a couple of different angles with this election looming now less than 2 weeks away. We spoke about sort of the demographic and regional areas that would have the biggest impact. We talked about the key issues, but now I want to take sort of a speculative glance looking forward and look at two potential outcomes and what life will look like moving forward. So first off, let's take a look at what if the UCP wins? What are you expecting to see across this province? What is life going to be like for Albertans if the UCP wins?
So everything that we've been seeing from the UCP, Adam, over the campaign is a lot of common sense policies. Like we talked about this in the last chat you and I had, is that I wouldn't even call them conservative policies, they're common sense policies. So enhanced public safety, enhanced healthcare, and also an enhanced economy, which we desperately need, and I think we could do really, really well at. I think what the UCP will do, so a lot of more kind of business as usual things when it comes to what they should have been doing. But I think what they will do is we'll really see the UCP shine where it wasn't the COVID era where they were confused and I don't think stood up for Albertans the way I think they should have. Right. And the other thing that I think you'll see is a UCP that is pretty vocal around federal overreach on Alberta's autonomy. And I think that'll be very different from previous UCP governments where we're going to see, I think, a stronger autonomy focus than before.
Now, you mentioned something there in terms of safety, in terms of security. One of the sort of contentious points, maybe not contentious anymore, with Rachel Notley trying to backtrack the harm reduction and safe drug supply narratives. That's clearly not a popular approach to this.
These are policies that have been failed policies, and that's what the NDP is trying to bring here to Alberta, and that's what we're trying to stop. These drugs are being diverted. We never talked about that. They're being diverted. And guess where they're being diverted to? The junior highs, the high schools, the post-secondaries.
And the UCP has taken a, if not challenging, but certainly more assertive approach to helping people rather than feeding their addiction. Is that sort of an example of the types of ways they're tackling these issues?
Absolutely. We're leaving sentiment behind and empty words and coming back to common sense and action. Again, I think the left is starting to realize, and the NDP are starting to realize, that all that sentiment policy that they had out has clearly failed. Harm reduction in the sense of giving out, free drugs and so on hasn't worked. We still see an incredible number of addicts around downtown. We still see a gigantic opioid crisis and a lot of deaths. So the UCP are saying, well, why would you double down on something that isn't working versus now trying something different? Do they have all the solutions? No, they're trying them, but at least they're not saying, you know what, again, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
So we have seen, whether it be in healthcare, whether it be in cost-saving measures, returning business, drawing people once again into the province, sort of minute, and you might even say conservative improvements. Right. They aren't flipping the script, they aren't changing things, but that's perhaps, as you're suggesting, an advisable approach as a conservative province. We had conservative rule for a long, you can go back to social credit being in forever, and then you had conservatives in forever. 2015 sort of flipped that script on its head. There's been a lack of stability within conservative politics. Many people thought that Jason Kenney would come in and ssort of restore the balance and be the one to bring balance to the force. That clearly didn't last. What do you think the Conservatives, particularly Premier Daniel Smith, have to do to ensure that it isn't just 4 years or 8 years and that they actually are able to restore a long reign of Conservative politics?
I think the biggest and easiest thing, and we saw it shortly in the few years before 2015, is accountability to your constituents. What are your constituents asking you to do, and being accountable to them? And I think if we saw the pre-2015 provincial Conservatives and the turmoil that happened at the time with Alison Redford and the late Jim Prentice, etc., I think that there was too much comfort and too much I would call it stagnation within the party of saying, well, you're going to vote for us anyways, we're going to get elected, and that hurt them. So I still think that Conservative politicians still very much have to go out and earn their vote in Alberta, and also say, what are the constituents looking for and what do they need?
Now, there are a number of strong contenders from the UCP's leadership race still involved with the party, very active. Do you think that there should be some sort of contingency plan for the party, obviously Premier Smith, not likely to be the Premier forever, to start building some of those leadership characters, whether it be in someone like Brian Jean, or we just recently did an interview with a young sort of rising star, Chantal de Jong. Do you think they should start looking towards that future?
Absolutely. So when you're picking your cabinet, you want to pick great talent. But at the same time, I feel like, again, and this goes across the left or the right, is if you serve for too long, then things get stagnant. You close the door for ideas. And the other thing as well is you don't build any good succession planning. And to me, I think that's something that every premier should look at, is what is my most what is my best way of building succession within the party? What is the best way to build the next premier of Alberta, etc.? So you do think long term, and that way you keep ideas fresh. You also show a new light and a new face within the party. So I do agree. I think that there's some amazing up and comers within the UCP that come with a lot of talent, some very, very deep resumes, and I'd love to see them on the front bench.
Now, the other side of this equation, not Team Blue, but Team Orange. If I can weigh in just for a moment, one thing that I'm certainly not looking forward to, and we've seen the treatment of the media, not to make this story about us, right, but with the UCP, it's business as usual. It doesn't matter if you're writing for a left-wing rag or an ultra-conservative outlet or anywhere in between. You go in, you ask a question, it's answered. That has not been the situation with the NDP. So there is a genuine fear, I think, among many journalists, anyone critical of the government, particularly if you want to be critical and the government won't let you in, that we're going to be dealing with that. People being excluded, questions not being answered for the foreseeable future. But beyond that personal concern, what do you expect to see if the NDP forms the next government? So,
Adam, you're bang on. What's shocking and surprising and very hypocritical is the left is now the ones that are reducing freedoms and what they would have been champions of free speech and free press and so on. They're the ones that are restricting it, and we're seeing the Conservatives or the right are the ones that welcome all. So what I think we'll see is I don't even think we need to talk about a what if scenario, because we have seen what an NDP government has. Unfortunately, we lived 4 years. And I remember just finding out the news and I'm like, oh, this isn't going to be good in 2015. And then we saw how weak it was. So a really weak economy. They completely went after the core industries of Alberta, oil and gas and agriculture. I do expect them to do the same. The other thing as well is they're a very, very federalist party. Which means, again, rather than protecting Alberta from federal overreach, and you're starting to see it with Rachel Notley kind of tiptoeing around Jagmeet Singh, who shares the same party name, party colors, party, branding, trying to tiptoe around that and in doing it in such a way where, oh, I disagree with him, but I'm not really overtly standing up for Alberta either. So I think we'll see a government that doesn't stand up for Alberta, doesn't stand up for Alberta's autonomy, and autonomy over the things that matter for us. So whether pensions, taxes, law enforcement, etc. Resources obviously being a big one. But I think you'll see a weak economy. And the other thing is you'll see a doubling down on what is now the core voter base of the NDP, which is the public service. And I don't mean frontline public service workers, but more so the administrative bloat that we've seen in a lot of large public service administrations right now. I think you're gonna start to see that, and you're gonna see them double down on the inefficiencies policies that got us to where we are today in the first place. So again, I'd be really worried. I'd be really worried about them from an ideological standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and even from a social and public health and public safety standpoint.
Yeah, I think you touched a few things just right on, nail on the head. First off, there definitely Rachel Notley has been doing her imitation of what Jagmeet does with Justin,
right,
criticizing but never quite standing up against or taking a serious stance. So I think you got that perfectly right there. But just generally speaking, I think the concerns that you've mentioned are, just throwing back to 2015, completely accurate. And we talked about this a little bit last time. Do you think that there is that possibility that last time they were caught off guard, they didn't maybe really think they had the mandate of the people? They had candidates running who had zero experience, not just in politics, but zero experience, like fresh out of school. Not to demean those people by any metric, but they weren't ready for it. This time, they think they might form government. They're ready for it. And if they get anything like a majority, they're going to have the mandate. So beyond doubling down with union bosses and high-paid officials in AHS, do you think some of this extremely dangerous rhetoric, whether it be on critical race issues, whether it be on completely taking over schools, defunding homeschooling, all of these things that are attacks on fundamental freedoms, do you think those will be significantly worse than last time?
I think so. I think they'll feel empowered. The other thing as well is governments, whether left or right, their number one objective is to get elected. Mm-hmm. So if they create an environment that keeps them in power and keeps them getting elected, I think it goes against the principles of what we as Albertans, who we are, I think the beacon, us in Saskatchewan, the beacons of small government, mm-hmm. the beacons of entrepreneurialism, the beacons of low taxes, the beacons of responsible resource development. All of those things are not within the value set of the NDP. And I think that they'll double down on it to create an environment where, they keep voting them in and they keep them in power. And I also think that there's an innate, if I would describe this, there's an innate, I don't know if it's hate or distaste within the NDP for what everything Alberta represents. All those values that I talked about, I feel like they don't stand up for that. And I think they stand up for a core voter base and a voter base that they feel like they could sway towards them, predominantly typically in the urban areas.
I definitely agree they don't stand for those Alberta principles, the principles that led you to fall in love with this place when you came here. And I think that those principles, the real principles, are authentic inclusivity, opportunity, everyone's equal. If someone messes with your buddy, you're going to protect them. No one's messing around. Those authentic values where everyone feels included and everyone has an equal opportunity. They use rhetoric and progressive language that sounds similar, but is in fact not the same thing.
You're bang on, Adam. The way I look at it is I moved to Alberta for the Alberta lifestyle and to live the Albertan way of life and to respect its industries, whether that was oil and gas and agriculture. And I'm very lucky to have a foot in either in my professional and also in my personal life. I'm really lucky that way and also very blessed. I didn't move to Alberta and say, hey, you've got to adapt to my way of life. Or the other part of it as well is we don't want to become a socialistic big government province like other provinces in the country without naming names, right? So the thing is, why, right? Like, why change the greatness that Alberta was built on? So to your point, a couple of questions earlier about business as usual, people vote for change. I actually want to vote for stable, responsible growth like we've always had it in the past. And I want that kind of, again, the Ralph Klein days of just Alberta being unapologetically Alberta. Mm-hmm. That's who we are.
Yeah. These updates that we've been providing, all of our coverage of the election, it's fallen under this banner of Alberta Decides, not Ontario Decides, not Ottawa Decides. I think it is important. People coming here for better taxes, for more affordable housing, for job opportunities. Like yourself, you experienced that firsthand, just whether it was business, whether it was the rodeo, you were embraced within this community. People should understand that the reason those things exist is because of our industries and because of our government backing away, cutting taxes back, creating that opportunity. I do think, just objectively speaking, despite their promises and attempts to twist it, the NDP would very likely jeopardize that. The UCP has been far from perfect, but I think they serve less of a risk to what Alberta is than the NDP.
Agreed. And I think the UCP in today's format. Again, I want my politicians, whether conservative or otherwise, I want them to earn my vote. So I feel like the UCP are now acting as ones in a party that wants to earn my vote and truly say, okay, this is what you're looking for as a constituent, rather than taking it for granted. They represent very closely what I'm looking for in terms of my government and the politicians that they're at. So they're really looking at building an Alberta that is strong, that's got solid foundations, that's economically ahead, but also looks after its citizens and looks after its community. I don't think the NDP have that. Now, they're trying to soften, if you will, their language over the last little while. But at the same time, I think what they do is they have their voter base locked in, so public sector, typically union, etc. But then they're trying to bring in a little bit more of that urban audience, which I think the UCP are now very strongly coming to earn as well.
Certainly. Now, we've had the opportunity to have 3 of these conversations. You're probably going to hop on some of our live stream coverage throughout the election. But I did kind of want to give you an opportunity. I'll sign off, but I want to give you the final word for our viewers as they sort of head into this election season. So I'll do my bit now. For everyone at home, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos, and with the last word.
Thank you, Adam. I'll say again, Danielle Smith, the MLA, is going to win her seat, like as an MLA, and Rachel Notley, the MLA, is going to win her seat. So get out and find out which riding you're living in, who are your candidates, what do they stand for, what their backgrounds are, because I think that's where it is the fight is going to be district by district and riding by riding, rather than, Team Rachel or Team Smith.
Well, very fortunate to have been joined once again by Tariq Elnaga for more conversations like this and for all of our coverage on this critical election for Alberta 2023. I'm encouraging you to check in regularly at albertadecides.com. And as always, if you want to chip in and support our independent journalism, that's the spot to do it.